Yup. Well, hello there people. So here we are on the 1st of June 2019 and summer is here. Meant to get up to about 28 degrees C today, which is absolutely brilliant. I think that's about 82 degrees Fahrenheit, something like that, but absolutely lovely weather, so there we are. But what I thought I'd do today is do a little bit of a video on grape growing. So if you've been watching my channel for a while, you all know that I'm indeed very enthusiastic with regards to grape growing, and I have some in here and some over there, all over the show really. So what shall we do? We won't start with this one yet. We'll look at some of the ones growing outside. Now, with regards to growing grapes, there's so many things to consider. Now, one thing that they like is they like a south-facing wall or fence if you're going to grow them outside. Okay, they like a lot of sun. So if you think of, traditionally, if you think of where a grape would grow, you would think of somewhere like the south of France, wouldn't you, or Spain, or somewhere like that. And so they like the extra heat and the longer sort of heat period, if you will, of the day provided by a south-facing wall, or fence. So they do indeed like that. You can grow them in a greenhouse or a polytunnel, and the traditional way in which people grow grapevines in greenhouses or polytunnels, they have the root outside so it can get the water and keep the root cool, and then with this sort of a vine cascading into the polytunnel or the greenhouse. So that's the traditional way of doing it, but later on I'll show you how I am indeed doing it. So there we are. Now with regards to soil, they will tolerate poor soil, okay. One thing they don't like is soil that holds water too much. So if you think of the roots sitting in water, they don't really like that. So if you've got soil like that, you could maybe consider growing them in a container, or you could which you make your own growing medium, or you could put lots of organic matter into the soil, a lot of compost, a lot of well rotted manure to improve the soil that way. So when there's a will, there can be a way. So look at it like that. So what else is there about grapes? Oh, I'll come to those later. So we'll start over here. Okay, so I've got a vine here. Now I took this vine from a cutting probably about 2 or 3 years ago, something like that. It's one of two varieties. It's either Lakemont Seedless or Muscat Blanc. So put it in the ground here. What I did, I took the cutting and I had it in a pot for about a season or so. Then I put it in here and it was doing really well, but the problem is some some pigeon, some fat bird or something sat on it and it just broke, which can be a problem. But so what it did was it had to basically start again, and I repaired it with some flower arranging stroke grafting tape. I'll show you that in a moment. Now, when a grape produces fruit, it produces the fruit off of tendrils which grow from last year's growth. So what it did was put out a load of growth last year, and I'll show you in a moment where the little fruits are at the moment, little tiny little fruitlets, almost flowers, some of them at the moment are. These grow off of wood which grew last year. So I'll just get the old camera and show you what we've got. Okay, right, so this is the vine here. Now you may be noticing these little blister mites, this little sort of deformity, if you will, of the leaves. Now these are called blister mites, okay, and I was informed a while ago that apparently this is harmless to the vine and the fruit. It's basically a little mite that lives in the leaves and overwinters in the vine. So, but they say it doesn't cause any damage, and it hasn't really improved much with regards to sort of treatments. So thankfully it doesn't it doesn't damage the vine, so to speak. So that's what I've been told. So there we go. So I'm not worrying about it. So just there you go, other signs of the old blister mite there. Okay, so I'll show you where the rootstock is. Well, I say rootstock, the cutting that I took. There we go, from there, and it put out all this lovely growth last year, where my finger is, all the way up there to make the main framework. And then you could see, I'll show you that one again. There you go. That's from this year's growth. There you go, coming off of last year's growth. See that there, look? Last year's growth, this year's growth, and there is indeed a little bunch of grapes. Indeed, very little at the moment. It will get bigger. So there you go. So that's one homegrown vine taken from a cutting, and cheap as chips, really, isn't it? So I do have a playlist on grapes. If you look at that, you can see vines that I've grown at previous addresses. But I did have one vine. I used to refer to it as the monster vine, and that had used to get well over 100 bunches of grapes each year. I think you check the the playlist, you'll see that. But that was variety Lakemont Seedless, which is an American variety. I've spoke a lot about that. So if you want to learn more about that, look at that playlist. But yeah, one thing I love about grapes is the fact that they crop so prolifically, and I just think they truly are a great thing to grow, in my opinion. And also there's the heritage side of it. I mean, grapes have been grown here in the UK since Roman times, and there's a huge misconception that you can't grow grapes here, and a misconception that the grapes that you do get here are horrible and sour, which with modern day varieties that is indeed not the case. Lakemont Seedless and indeed Muscat Block, but in particular Lakemont Seedless on my vine before, they were almost honey sweet. They were really beautiful with that lovely light green colour to them. Really, really were lovely. Okay, so this is a grapevine that I indeed did once again take from a cutting, but it's growing in this, what I think is a 35 litre tub, and I've got a mixture of garden soil and organic matter, and which in terms of what that means is like well rotted manure, things like that. So garden soil, well rotted manure, and some compost as well, potting compost. I've got multi-purpose, I've got some of that in there as well. So here you go, I'll show you this vine. Right, that was the cutting there, and you can see all of this darker stuff being like last year's growth, and this year it's put out some beautiful growth, helped very much by the additional warmth brought on by this warm wall here. But I'll show you the grapes, or some of the grapes. There you go. There you go. Now, of course, the grapes are very, very small indeed at this time of year. In case any of you out there are thinking, what is he talking about? They don't look anything like a grape. Well, they will get bigger, okay? And October, sort of like late September to October, they should be edible by that time. There you go, look at that. So absolutely gorgeous. Look at the colour of this vine. It looks lovely, doesn't it? Now, this was a little error on my part, I have been informed, but I can't honestly say the vine's had any detriment effects because of it. There's more little bunches under there. The more I look, the more I find. Yeah, look. There you go. But I got this growing in a pot, obviously, but apparently they like lighter coloured pots. They don't like the the roots to be too warm. And of course, a black pot will attract more heat than would a sort of a browner, lighter coloured pot. Wooden pots are apparently the best for this. So if you're going to be growing a grape in a pot, you may consider using a wooden pot. And I might even move this at a later date, but repot it, but at the moment it's going to stay in here. And one thing, if you're growing grapes in containers, is you must make sure you don't let them get overly waterlogged. So good drainage, bit of drainage stone in there, some holes in the bottom of your pots. I mean, these are good because they've got holes there, look, see? But you mustn't let them get waterlogged, okay, because they don't like it. Now, here is a vine that there you go, cutting I think I took this last year. So what it normally does is roots the first year, second year puts out a little bit of growth, and then years 3/4, year 3 you might get a little bit of fruit, and year 4 it should start getting into a decent cropping level. So that's one for a later date there to crop. Won't get any fruit this year, obviously. If it does some good growth this year, maybe a little bit next year. Okay, so here we are into the polytunnel. So if you've been following me for a while, you'll know that I sort of like the informal garden, the informal approach. I don't like anything to be too sort of regimented, if you will. I mean, there are sort of things like the Guyot, I think you say it, Guyot method, G-U-Y-O-T, with which you train your tendrils of the vine along wires, and I have seen them have seen them done like that, but for me that's not really my style, and that's not really my approach. Certainly not with regards to backyard grape growing. I mean, if I was running a vineyard, then of course for productivity reasons and efficiency I probably would be going down that road, but that's not indeed what I'm running. So I'll show you what I've got in here. Now I've got 2 vines growing in here, and they are varieties Muscat Blanc there, and I've got Autumn Royal here. Now the Autumn Royal, I purchased that last year from Ken Muir, which is an Essex company, well established. They grow some great stuff, but it's down here, and it was a very robust looking vine to begin with. It's a variety from California, so it's recommended if you're going to grow it in a climate such as the UK, you grow it in a polytunnel or in a greenhouse, because of course, you know, the Californian growing period, if you will, is generally longer than what we get here, you know, so it will benefit from the extra heat. And it's very warm in here. I wouldn't be surprised if it's over 40 degrees C in here some days. At the moment, particularly today, I'm leaving, you know, the door open so it doesn't overheat. But the vine's doing well. I'll show you what it looks like. So remember what I said, so they fruit on tendrils growth which come off of last year's growth, if you will. Okay, so I'm calling them tendrils. There could probably be another term. Shoots. There you go, shoots off of last year's growth. That's better, isn't it? Okay, so this is last year's growth all the way along. Up there you see the darker wood, and all this green lush growth is from this year's wood. Okay, and you can see, there you go, I've got some crops. So I'm hoping, once again they're very small of course, but apparently these bunches get to a good size, so hopefully come September, October I'll have some lovely, you know, decent sized bunches of lovely Californian grapes growing here in Essex, UK. Come on, can you see that? I can't see it from there. Let's try and get a bit closer for you. There you go. Another little bunch of grapes there. So very beautiful, very lovely looking, and I've got it trained all the way up here. There you go. Now what I'm trying to do is, when I'm tying, I'm trying to use this is like washing line, you know. So if you ever get rid of an old washing line, you can keep it and you can just cut bits off of it or whatever, and you can use it as ties. I'm tying it to the polytunnel sort of supports, if you will, growing it all along there, and the plan is for big bunches of grapes to all be hanging, you know, next year down into the polytunnel. So that's the game and the aim of the game here. Now here, this is another vine I've got that I grew from a cutting that I took. There you go, see that? And I'm growing it in this polytunnel. This could go outside really, but I'm expecting it to do very well in here, and it's even carrying, won't be very much, but I'm going to let it do what it wants to do. A little bit of, you know, a little bit of a bunch of grapes there, but they really won't be that much on that. So yeah, quite happy. Got 2 new vines down here. They look very unimpressive, and if they, you know, if they continue to remain so, they may be going back, but I think they're going to be okay. They've just recently been grafted by, you know, whoever, so that's why they're like this. I'm willing to give them a chance anyway. Okay, so this is a grafted Lakemont seedless, and I purchased this, believe it or not, at the same time as that Autumn Royal that you have seen in the polytunnel. So I'll show you, admittedly that was a far more robust looking vine than this ever was from the start, but you know, you can just see how the extra catalyst of the heat in the polytunnel, how much difference it makes. But this one I want to grow up as like a vertical cordon up here, you know, like a big sort of thing, and eventually have, you know, huge crops of grapes cascading off of that. Okay, I've got another little vine here that I took from a cutting. I'm just going to let that sort of romp all over the floor at the moment, and then next year, sorry, in the dormant season, I'm going to tie it up, and you know, once again, huge productivity of grapes in the next few years. Okay, so this is another vine here. This is from a cutting again that I took. Now, making sure I'm keeping this one watered, okay, because if I don't, you know, it won't, you know, it won't take. I think I took it about last year, so established last year, and it's starting to put a bit of growth out this year, but you must make sure you keep them watered at this stage, you know, but they will, you know, once they're past sort of delicate stage, they can generally fend for themselves. So this is once again another vine, you know, which will come into its own in a few years' time. Okay, so I do indeed very much like taking my own cuttings, as you probably worked out. Okay, I've got a video on how to take a grapevine cutting, so I'll tell you quickly the way that you do it, okay? In fact, no, I'll show you these and then we'll go into that. So, right, so this is Lakemont seedless here. What's this? Autumn Royal, Muscat Blanc, and Lakemont seedless. Okay, so there's going to be some good vines there, cuttings already taken. If you think you can pay, you know, I mean, you do a bit of research on grape root stocks, you'll find it interesting to do with the wine trade and growing grapes in different countries and disease resistance and things like that. You'll find that interesting, but you know, I may cover that in a subsequent video, but you know, check that one out. But with regards to, you know, propagation of grapes without rootstocks and keeping it very simple, if you've got a friend that can give you a few, you know, allow you to take some cuttings from his vine, you know, it can be a great, real satisfying thing to do, and a great money saver as well. Okay, so the way that you take a grapevine cutting, okay, you do it during the dormant season, so that would be sort of like late November through to maybe late March. Depends on the weather and, you know, what the seasons are like where you live, but that's about that time when the leaves are off the vine. And what you do, you find a piece of last year's growth and you cut, you find 4 buds of last year's growth, okay? And what you do, or the previous season's growth, so let's say you're taking it in December, it'll be the bit that grew, you know, during the previous growing season, okay? And what you do is you find 4 buds, 1, 2, 3, 4, you cut it below the 4th bud, and you get some compost, or you get some dirt in a pot, or even in the ground, you know, and you put 2 buds in the ground and leave 2 above, and then you just leave it. You have to make sure you keep them moist, which is one reason why I've got my cuttings down there in a darker part of the garden, so that you know, they don't dry out, because they've got to be allowed to root. Okay, so there we go. That's a bit about grape growing. Now, one thing, grapes need a period of dormancy, okay? So that means like a period of rest, you know, when the leaves fall, because they're a deciduous vine, like a deciduous tree, you know, when the leaves fall. So wherever you put them, they've got to have a winter cooling period, okay? So, for instance, if you've got them in a, you know, a nice an unheated polytunnel or greenhouse like this, it's perfect in the summer. But of course, if you were heating it to like 20 degrees plus in the winter, it wouldn't be any good, because the vine couldn't go into dormancy. So an unheated, you know, area, if it's outside, of course, in a climate like the UK, you won't have a problem. That'll happen naturally. Or in an unheated polytunnel or greenhouse, you won't have the problem. Now, I stated earlier on that a lot of people, when they grow grapes in a polytunnel or a greenhouse. Now, somebody actually asked me a very interesting question actually the other day about possible subsidence with grapes being grown up against a house, and I thought this was a very interesting question actually, because, you know, one does worry when tree roots or whatever, you know, go underneath houses and can cause, you know, hundreds of £1,000s worth of damage. You know, it can be quite a scary thought. But so there was always something in me that told me that grapes wouldn't be too much of an issue with regards to this. Don't know why, but something always told me that. But I did a bit of research on the subject, and you're not to take my word for this, okay? You're to do your own research before you go making decisions of this magnitude. But I read that apparently the vines, the roots, if they find something that's, you know, too obstructive, so to speak, they go round it. They don't attempt to sort of keep pushing it like a tree root maybe would. And, you know, the roots can be very fibrous, so they're not as just potentially destructive. So maybe that's a little bit sort of interesting as well. But if if that really is a concern for you, and I totally understand if indeed it is, you can always just do what I've done out there, and you can grow one in a pot. And as you can see, that's coming into productivity, no problem. Of course, the overall vine won't be as big, but that's there's just so many options out there, you know, to people that you know, if you don't have a lot of money and you want to get going with this, you can just try and find a way of getting a grapevine cutting. I bet you if you went to the local allotment in the dormant season, you found some kind-hearted person there, you know, and you said to them, "Can I have a grapevine cutting, please, mate?" I bet you a lot of them would give you one, you know, and then you could grow your own grapevine cutting from that, couldn't you? So, yep. So that's a little bit about my grapevine sort of growing efforts, if you will. As I stated earlier, check that playlist out, because you know, then you can see what I really have done, you know, in the past, and this is not really that impressive yet compared to, you know, what the vines did at previous places. So there we go. So any questions, comments, whatevers or whatsits, post them down below. Enjoy the sunny, lovely, warm weekend, and of course, if you like my work, please feel free to like, share and subscribe. I'll see you in the next video. This yuzu tree is doing a lot better. Just in a day or two it's been in that pot. We won't babble about that today. We'll do that another day. Bye. Yeah, a lot of people, they like when they're growing grapevines to have the root outside. But I'll show you how I've got mine. So, explained the reasons for this earlier. It's because of you know, water supply to the vine, and also to keep it cool. But I have indeed got my vine planted straight inside the polytunnel. I did that for simplicity. One reason I did that was because I didn't want to be making holes in the old polytunnel there, and I didn't want to be sort of, you know, in the polytunnel down the side, you know, behind there. I didn't want to be doing all that, so I kept it simple, and I put it in here. And the simple fact that grapevines can be very, very deep rooted indeed, it should be able to get its own water, no issue. And the same with this one.